We are 915 days into the war, 915 days. One point to also make, you mentioned that, everybody, that we're told that February 24th, that's when the war began. We're also told October 7th, that's when the war began. And it's like, these wars, they started way before these times, that they're the arbitrary dates that they say, no, this is when it began. So what we saw this week was on Monday, Russia launched its biggest aerial assault since the start of its invasion. 127 missiles, 109 drones attacked 15 of Ukraine's 24 regions. Zelensky has said that the military has recently carried out the first successful test of a domestically produced ballistic missile. And he said that he was not able to share more details. So that's kind of frightening there. We've got also Ukraine saying that they have captured 594 Russian soldiers, taken control of about 500 square miles and 100 settlements since launching its incursion into Kursk region. So they're in Russia. They've taken some ground. Zelensky, now when it comes to peace talks, where we're at with that right now, it looks like Zelensky has said that he's going to be presenting what he's calling a victory plan to the United States and also to Trump and to Kamala Harris while he's in New York for the United Nations General Assembly next month. And he says that the main point of this plan is to force Russia to end the war. He wants that. He says he wants to end the war, but he wants it to be fair for Ukraine. You've got now, but then the incursion into Russia has kind of halted the peace talks. They were supposed to get together someplace, I think recently. I forgot exactly where they were supposed to be getting
I think it
together to
was
have
Qatar. I think
yeah,
maybe Qatar.
yeah, right. It's always okay. So they were going to get together there and have a discussion, but the incursion into Russia has the Russians don't like that. So they're like, no, we're not going to even
Just a
talk to
bit,
you if you're going to be.
just slightly.
So where do you think we're at now with this war, and where do you think it's going to, is it going to end? I thought when this war started, it would end very quickly.
Hmm.
Um, it hasn't. It is just drawn on and drawn on. And I don't know if that's by design, if the Russians intended to do that, if they really are being battled back by Ukraine and it's really tough to beat Ukraine because Ukraine's supplied with all these US weapons.
Hmm.
Or what is the big agenda here, and where do you see it ending? I mean, what's the sentiment of the Russian people at this point? Now Ukraine's taken some land in Russia. That's obviously, I mean, that must be somewhat scary for Russians,
Hmm.
I would assume. So what's the sentiment, first of all, of where you are in Moscow, the people? What are they thinking about this war?
Well, the first thing about Russians is they're not like Americans or European or people from the United Kingdom. And this is a big problem. People in the States see Russia and perceive that Russian people will think of things just like they do, and that Chinese people will see things just like they do because that's maybe the human condition. But the Russians don't see things the way the West does. The average Russian on the street, the average taxi driver, guy in a shop in a bar, he's exceptionally well educated about the background to this conflict. Lots of people are against the war in that they didn't want it to happen, but they knew it would happen as the pieces were stacked against Russia, backing it into a corner essentially. And Putin is exceptionally popular here. He's exceptionally popular. I mean, it's just a fact. People refuse to believe it that over 80% of the population here support Putin. It's true. I mean, it's true. The population support Putin. They want Putin in charge. They believe he's the only man for the job. So that's important background. Okay. The second thing I'd say is about the uh, trajectory of the war prior to Ukraine's incursion into Kursk. And I'll talk about that as well. So prior to that, Ukraine was really out of options. It had very few options, and it looked like this winter would be the end for Ukraine. And in my view, I see this as being a really pivotal point for Ukraine this winter. Remember, Russia has just destroyed much of what remained of Ukraine's energy producing capacity. Remember, it's 30 degrees here now, and you don't need to have the air. You don't need to have as much heating on as you do in the south. And there's going to be huge amounts of stress on the heating systems, and that's going to have a huge societal impact on Ukraine. And that's why the Russians are targeted. Also, the ability for them to produce weapons, etc., the military-industrial complex as well. So that's why this attack happened, and was also, I think, a signal to the West Who I remember we were told by the Washington Post and the Observer and the New York Times 2 years ago that Russia had no missiles left.
Mhm.
And those same newspapers 2 days ago told you that they just launched the biggest barrage of hypersonic drones in the history of
Right.
modern warfare.
Right.
So you gotta don't forget the guys now telling you, oh yeah, the Ukrainians have invaded Kursk. They've invaded Kursk. Well, let me tell you something about that as well. Russia is a continent. Kursk is an oblast in that on that continent.
Mhm.
Even if you were to believe the Ukrainians who say they've got 500 square miles now of the territory, which is heavily contested by people, if the Ukrainians drive an armored jeep into a settlement, an isolated settlement, put up a flag, take a photo, and then drive back to the front line, that doesn't mean they control it. There's a huge amount of
Mhm.
psyops going on here. But even if they took the entire Kursk region, which they're nowhere close to doing, they haven't even reached Kursk, the city of Kursk. Their offensive has stopped, and it's stopped at great cost. 6,500 Ukrainian soldiers have died there. Um, they've lost dozens and dozens of tanks, hundreds of armored vehicles in this conflict. This is all verified. Okay, we know that. Okay, and what have they got for that? Well, they know that they're not going to be able to hold the territory because once Russia spins up its response to this, within months, at least, I'd say it would probably take 3 months for the Russians to push the Ukrainians back across the border. Uh, this will be destroyed. It will be destroyed. In the east of the country, in Donbass, where the center of the fighting is, the idea of the Ukrainians was, and this is General Syrskyi, the Ukrainian commander in chief, he said that, we want to deflect Russia's huge advance in the east. And the Russians are advancing in the east day by day, village by village, town by town, and soon city by city, uh, to pull their reserves up north to Kursk. Yesterday, he admitted that it hadn't worked. He said the Russians have increased their offensive in the east. They're stalled now in Kursk. They're losing a lot of men and material. And what have they got? Even if they had 500 square miles, Kim, that amounts to, okay, get this, 0.00, I think, 0.64% of the landmass of Russia.
Mm.
0.0064%. Less than a fraction of a percent of the landmass of Russia is
Right.
in Ukrainian hands temporarily, whereas Russia now controls 22% of Ukraine. Ukraine's population has been shattered and smashed in half. They've lost 750,000 soldiers in combat. The army that stood when the Russians came across the border in 2022 has been destroyed 3 times over. Ukraine doesn't have a military. It has this hodgepodge of second-hand equipment dumped into it by NATO countries. It has the average age of a combat soldier now in the Ukrainian army is 43 years of age. The average age of a combat soldier in the Russian army is 20.
Mm.
The demographics just don't add up. Russia has a huge indigenous military industrial complex. It has the biggest reserves of oil, steel, gas on earth.
Right.
It has a massive population, at least maybe 5 times now the size of Ukraine. And it has an exceptionally popular and stable political leadership in Putin. This is only going to go one way. This ridiculous adventure into Kursk has, in my view, people who I knew here who are kind of very lukewarm about the war. I just want it to end. Now they want to go to Kiev. This has really hardened the Russians. You got to remember, prior to the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, the biggest invasion in history, and they came through Kursk as well, remember, which is very, very poignant and relevant for the Russian psychology, because the Great Patriotic War, as it's known here, has a pseudo-religious importance here among the Russian people. Remember, 27 million people died defeating the Nazis. So when they see Ukrainian soldiers wearing SS helmets,
Yeah.
painting swastikas on their tanks, coming through these villages again, this, in my view, is the absolute most ludicrous strategic misadventure for the Ukrainians. I've seen a huge uptick in nationalism and a desire to get the job done. People calling for all kinds of crazy responses to the Ukrainians. Thankfully, Putin doesn't react or respond on the timetable of the Americans or British or certainly not the Ukrainians. He does things very carefully. He's a seasoned strategist. He knows where this is going. He sees what I see, I believe, which is that the Ukrainians had very few reserves to stop the Russians in the east, very few. And now they're killing them in the killing feeds of Kursk for absolutely zero strategic value. The Russians will push them out. They've stopped them, and now they're going to start grinding them back. The Ukrainians have no way to sustain an assault in Kursk. They're going nowhere. Where are they trying to go? They're
Yeah.
not going to get any further. So this denies them the ability to stop the Russians, who are advancing in the east. It's a matter of time before the very significant strategic city of Pokrovsk is going to fall. The Russians are flowing forward in the east, and the commanding charge of the Ukrainian army, Sirsky, who was, by the way, trained up the road from me here in Moscow in the Center for Cryptography. He was trained. He was a Soviet officer. I've got a video of him marching on Red Square. Guy speaks Russian. So he has said, look, it didn't work. The Russians have doubled down in the east. So remember, in Russia, you've got 9,000 men a day in some cases volunteering for service. We don't have any forced subscription here in Russia. They're exceptionally well paid. They're professional contract troops. While Ukraine is dragging people off the streets, forcing them to serve in these battalions, they're getting wiped out. It's going to end one way. It's going to end on the negotiating table. I think it's a desperate attempt by Zelensky to sort of get a bargaining chip. And regarding capturing 500 soldiers, they may well have done, because there's a lot of kids doing their military service were captured. 115 were exchanged last week for 115 Ukrainians. And regarding prisoners, and the Ukrainians acknowledge this, in total, Russia has 8 times more prisoners of war than the Ukrainians. This is the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense says that. They've 8 times more prisoners than we do, belonging to us. It's an astounding number. So stick with the numbers. 0.0064% of a single percent of Russia is under temporary control of a poorly supplied, confused Ukrainian military. I've seen Ukrainian officers saying, why did we do this? What is the point of this? This is insane. And America, even, we believe here, didn't know they were going to do it. They kind of were surprised by it. The Russians were certainly surprised by it, of course. Now, if they had a plan to, for a big arrow sort of offensive somewhere, a destination, but they don't. They've been stopped.
Right.
And what happens when you get stopped in the field when you're attacking? You get destroyed.
Right.
And where are the reserves going to come from? Where's the equipment going to come from? They've lost hundreds of armored vehicles, which are so hard to replace for Ukraine. Russia makes tanks. Russia makes aircraft. And also, Russia has the biggest nuclear and most advanced delivery system and most modern nuclear weapons arsenal on Earth.
Yeah.
Don't forget that.
Yeah, it doesn't. It really lacked strategy. I mean, it was kind of like, okay, so you did this. Now, for what purpose exactly? What's the point? Where are you going from here? It lacks
these are
strategy.
questions that the Ukrainian command are asking. They're asking Zelensky, why did we do this?
Right.
Why did we do this? And it's a PR stunt. It's a good PR
that's all
stunt.
it's a PR
This war
stunt.
is not going to be won on Twitter or Instagram. It's going to be won in the fields of Donbass. And the Russians are advancing in Donbass. And they're denuding the Ukrainians of significantly scarce resources in Kursk. Kursk will never become a part of Ukraine. This is an absolute insanity. It'll never happen.
Right.
Not in a million years. No more than Crimea will return, or Zaporozhia, or Lugansk or Donbass. They will never be under Ukrainian administration. They were, long before Ukraine existed as a state, they were part of Russia, by the way.
Right. Right.
So let's get that out of the way. Long before Ukraine was created as a state, all of these regions were part of Russia, of the Russian Empire as well. So very interesting stuff.
I mean, it really looks like their incursion into Kursk is just it's a last ditch. Like we can do something kind of, we're sort of scary, I guess. But really, it just signaled it's time to negotiate, guys. I mean, this is, once you've lost the plot, you're no longer doing what you should be doing, which is gaining back. The point would be to gain back the land that you lost, right? That would be the point of this war. That's what you should be doing. Instead, you're going and doing something kind of weird over here.
Well, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I was looking at today, I was in the studio doing a piece about Nord Stream, and they've made a statement saying they're completely ruling out any negotiations with the Ukrainians now. To your point, how can you deal with these guys? I mean, they were discussing something with them in Qatar, we're told, but they've broken off those now. They're saying, look, this has to be finished on the battlefield. Who has the resources and the will and the manpower and the capacity militarily to do this? Watch what happens when the U.S. election ends.
Yeah.
With Vance, JFK, Tulsi Gabbard. If these people are in charge of or have a significant influence on American foreign policy, Zelensky is finished.
Right.
And the other reason why this man doesn't want this war to end is because the first thing that will happen when it ends is there'll be an election. And if the opinion polls in Ukraine have anything to do with it, he'll be completely decimated.
Hey guys, this was just a clip of a longer show. Catch the full show by going to KimIversonShow.com. It is free. It airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. You could go back now and watch this full interview. I highly recommend it. Again, go to KimIversonShow.com. Thank you so much for watching.